Wait just a little bit. Thought we might wait just a little bit in case some other people join us so they get to meet you as well. My name is Wendy Turgeon. I've been working in the area of philosophy with children for more years than I care to count. I'm also on one of the boards at Plato, and I'm excited about this topic because I think it really is both an invitation to administrators to see the value of philosophy in a classroom. And I'm thinking classroom everywhere from preschool on up through high school. So regardless of where you might be teaching or how you might be interacting with young people, I say children, but assume that that's a very broad concept, young people in general. I think there's opportunities to engage them philosophically, even preschoolers. So my topic and our topic for discussion is this idea of creativity. So to kind of prime the pump, if you will, I have a mercifully short PowerPoint that I thought I would speak to briefly, and then we could take it from there once I figure out how to get it going. So here we go. And this may give us some ideas of things we could talk about. All right, so I'm hoping everyone can see the front slide of my PowerPoint. Does that sound reasonable? Yes? Cassie's nodding yes. Great. Okay. So how does philosophy with children promote creativity? That's what we're going to be thinking about today. And I started with thinking about some of the characteristics of doing philosophy with children. And of course, one of the key is that it creates what we call a community of inquiry. I suspect a lot of these terms are familiar to many of you, but if they're not, they are certainly centered in almost every approach to doing philosophy with children. So we create a community, and it's not just any community, it's a community of questioning, of asking questions, but it's both a community and an inquiry. The goal is to explore difficult but intriguing questions, philosophical questions. And when I present the idea of doing philosophy with young people, I usually say, who's good at listening? Not too many people raise their hand on that one. Who's good at talking? I get a lot of responses there, at least with children. And then who's good at thinking? And the young people are a little bit more thoughtful. Some will say yes, some are, not quite sure which way to go on that. But I try to present philosophical engagement as a process of listening, talking, and thinking. One of the key descriptions of a philosophical inquiry within a community of inquiry is that this idea of moving towards critical, caring, and creative thinking. There have been a number of articles around the world, basically, about thinking of philosophical inquiry as encompassing these three aspects. And they really are overlapping circles, if you will. So when we think of critical thinking, we, of course, think of asking questions. We think of looking for reasons for why I might say something or believe something. We evaluate the ideas that are presented within the community. And with a goal of building good arguments, sound arguments, which have true facts and valid reasoning. But we're also open to exploring alternatives, recognizing that there is always another step, another way of looking at things. And that involves challenging claims as well. It's a collective search for better ideas. Maybe not the best idea, maybe not the final answer, but the idea of a kind of forward movement. That when we're having a community of inquiry, we're not just, and we're critically thinking, we're not just sharing ideas and saying, oh, everyone's great, isn't that wonderful? We're also exploring and examining those ideas. And that's the critical component. The caring component is an interesting aspect of it. And it purports to remind us that this is a community. It's not a debate. It's not a blood sport. We have to listen to others and not just say we're listening, but actually really listen to the other people speaking, not just be thinking about what I want to say next. We want to wait for our turn, not just shout out or dominate in any form or fashion. We can ask clarifying questions instead of me assuming I know what you're saying or what you mean. I should stop and say, do you mean this? And give that other person a chance to explain, clarify, and perhaps I might have gotten it wrong. So recognizing my own fallibility and the fact that I might be mistaken is an important part of caring thinking. Of course, being open to new ideas, focusing on ideas, not persons. So in other words, it's not about judging an idea because you said it, or it's coming from that group over there, but focusing on the ideas within the center of the inquiry, but also seeing persons. That the caring thinking recognizes that I am engaged with people, with persons, not with the other, to use a very familiar philosophical meme, if you will, and in acknowledging persons and their ideas, that they're actually worthy of consideration, even if I completely disagree with them at first glance. And of course, the interesting thing about this is there's not a lot of caring thinking going on in my country. And I am from New York in the United States. I realize we might have people from all over both this country and other countries. And that's a real problem when we stop listening to one another. So caring thinking is the kind of second piece of the pie. However, creative thinking is our theme for this evening. And I tried to think a little bit about what do we mean by creative thinking. And first, I think it's an openness to the fluidity of ideas, that ideas are like fish in a stream. They move around, they flash this way, that way, and we don't just focus on one. We want to recognize that even my idea might be an idea in progress, in process. Creative thinking can include exploring analogies, similes, coming up with examples. A philosophical thought experiment can generate creative thinking. And this involves a willingness to possibly redefine an idea or a concept and maybe go even in a different direction. However, there should be reasons. So there's always this notion that we are trying to better understand something, emphasis on better understand something. And so I have to be open to a completely new way of looking at things, novelty, but at the same time, I can demand of that there is an explanation or a rational process behind it, or at least a beginning one that we can then share together. So we're making new connections, possibly disrupting traditional ones. A lot of my students, the first thing they'll do is when you want to define a concept is they'll look at what the dictionary says. Well, dictionaries are usually spectacularly unhelpful when it comes to philosophical concepts. So being willing to say like, well, okay, let's think about what truth is, or what love is, or what free speech means. And then finally, and of course, this is certainly not an exhaustive list here, but recognizing the power of novelty, the power of creativity, and that the unexpected can often both surprise us, but generate even better ideas in ourselves, not being closed off to somebody who seems to be coming from left field. And a number of years ago, I worked with graduate students in philosophy with children, and they were all practicing teachers. And the interesting thing I learned from them, because they would go out and try this in their classrooms, was that sometimes their very best philosophical inquirers were the children in the what at that time we were calling special ed. These were children that were not particularly good at mainstream learning in the typical fashion. They didn't necessarily do well on tests. They might have had all sorts of other issues going on, but they sometimes would come out with incredibly brilliant ideas because they were in a regular class, they were so used to being wrong and just being said, no, that's not the right answer. The young children that had the most difficulty with doing philosophy were not what we call the special ed kids, but the kids who were always getting the right answer. They were super bright. They knew exactly which way to go with that. And then they would like say the answer, and then they were shocked that the inquiry would still go on. And now I'm generalizing, of course, but it was an interesting insight that the teachers provided me, because to me, it emphasized that when you open your mind to kind of exploring another avenue, this kind of creative piece of our personas, it can enrich a philosophical discussion. So the ways that creativity in philosophy with children manifests itself is, first, I think philosophy is an open invitation to novelty. The beauty in philosophy, although the frustrating part in philosophy, is that it doesn't have the right answer in the back of the book. And that can be unsettling to young people who are used to an educational system where there is a right answer in the back of the book, or the teacher has it and you just have to know what it is and move on. So the kind of fluidity, I'll use that word again, fluidity of the discussion can be both liberating, but it can also be a little frustrating. I think it traverses boundaries. I think creativity, often associated with art, music, poetry, literature, movement, dance, and general movement, and even games. I think that can be an important part of building genuine philosophical inquiry. And just to kind of give a very simple example of kind of, what ifs. So to illustrate this more abstract notions, I have some samples that I've used in classrooms. And one of them is I've given them this image, which I'm hoping you all can see. It's a little cut off. And I tell them to write a story about it. What's going on there? And they work in groups. And it's fascinating to see how I can get 5 completely different stories from this image, and whether this is a good thing, whether the dragon is a bad thing or a good thing. What is this? Where is this happening? Who are the players? Who's seeing the dragon? And is the dragon seeing whoever is looking at it? It's kind of a great way to give a kind of visual prompt and then see where they create a story and then use that story for philosophical discussion. Of course, children creating their own art is another rich source by drawing. And for young children, perhaps they're not particularly good at articulating ideas, but they can draw something phenomenally engaging. And then that becomes a talking point, or it becomes a way they can express their own philosophical ideas. I'm also the editor for the Plato journal Questions, which comes out once a year. It's now free access, open access. And it's basically the work of young people, everywhere from preschool on up through high school. Their writings, their literary expressions, and often their visual expressions. And with young children, we often get pictures because their teachers have had a discussion and then they ask them to draw some kind of picture that captures those ideas. And that can be a rich source of inquiry. One of our colleagues, Thomas Wartenberg, has just come out with a brand new book called Thoughtful Images, which, full disclosure, I haven't seen yet, but I am looking forward to it. But it's the idea of using an image, much like my dragon perhaps, to generate some philosophical thinking. And the very fact that the image could be visual and you have to translate it into language opens up other doors for being creative. And then finally, I have a kind of a piece of music that I'm just going to share briefly with you. I promise we're not playing the whole thing, that I think music could also be a really wonderful source for inquiry. So let's see if I can just play a teeny piece of this for you. And I have to try to fast forward it to get to what I want you to hear. This is a piece by Alan Hovhaness. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. It's from YouTube. So let's just play a little teeny bit of it. Seattle Symphony. And yes, he's included whale songs in his piece of music. So I'll stop there. But I think what's interesting is I think that could generate a kind of discussion. What does this music mean? Are the whales part of the performance? And of course, the whole question of whale intelligence or animals could be entered into through the door of this particular music piece. I'm also thinking music, or rather movement, can be incredibly productive, whether it's dancing out ideas, using games, perhaps video games or playing games, even positioning around the room. One of our colleagues, Eric Kenyon, had worked with preschool, very young children. And one of the ways he got them to kind of express their ideas was to have them move in different quadrants of the room based on whether they thought this or that. And so that idea of movement can also be a creative way of approaching it. And of course, theater, poetry, creating their own plays to work out ideas, or going back to kind of Gareth Matthews' notion of starting a story and then letting the children create the end of the story, thinking philosophically through it, are all ways that this could be, I think, quite productive. So I've talked for a little bit now, but I would like to stop talking and give you an opportunity to perhaps first introduce yourself to the group. So you need to unmute. If you do work with young people, perhaps share that. And then maybe we could hear some of your ideas about how philosophy has been creative, or how you see philosophy leading to enriching creativity in young people. So